I'm looking forward to actually telling you some stories from about the female disciples of the Buddha. So we won't have groups tonight. Actually, I'm not sure how long I'll be talking, but I'm going to ask you to sit back, relax, and just let the stories touch you. Really, at the end of it, of me talking, there will be a bit of time to just for any of us to comment or ask a question. Yeah, but yeah, let's get going. So I want us to take us back actually to these series on the Sangha nights, because we are focusing for a while now on wisdom, and that's wisdom is part of the threefold path. So we explored ethics and the precepts on Sangha nights, a few evenings, and then we looked into meditation, and then we started wisdom. So ethics, meditation, and wisdom are the threefold path. And that series on wisdom, on insight, was started off by Arta Bandhu, who gave a series of talks on wisdom, and he really focused on the three levels of wisdom. The three levels being listening and reflecting on what you hear, the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma. Really reflect deeply on that. And then the third level is, in a way, it's meditating, but in a way of that you make those teachings so your own that they really transform you. Yeah, you really become, in a way, the insight of those teachings. You really let it touch you. So, listening, reflecting deeply, and becoming, you could say. Yeah, becoming insightful. So, and then we had a lovely talk by Kusala Devi. She drew from the Honorable Sutta, and in there the Buddha distinguishes between wise attention and unwise attention, and which is really when unwise attention is when we make unhelpful choices. Wise attention is when we make helpful ones. Yeah, and the helpful ones obviously will help us to gain insight, wisdom. And then we just recently had the series from Marivachin on the 5 spiritual faculties, of which wisdom is one. And those are 5 faculties, 5 qualities that we develop when we develop insight, when we develop wisdom in a Buddhist sense. Yeah, so the central one is awareness, mindfulness. Without awareness, mindfulness, we can't pay attention to anything really. So, on whatever level. So that's one. And then the other ones are faith or confidence and energy, meditation, and wisdom. So he brought those out over a series of talks. So yeah, a very different approach now. 2 more evenings on wisdom, and then we'll do something else on Sangha nights. So yeah, storytelling. And I really want to focus on those female disciples of the Buddha. But before we're going into the stories, I'll tell you 3, really, and a little 3.5. So there you go. But I want to just make a few remarks about wisdom in the Buddhist sense. 3 remarks. So the first one is that really it's important that we realize that wisdom is not only intellectual, if at all, and that terminology that we use of understanding or knowledge, of wisdom, that can make us think as if we understand something with our intellect, and that we've understood it. But hey, no, real transformation goes much deeper than that, goes far beyond the intellect. And I love a little bit from Sangharakshita that I'll quote him, something that he talks about, or he writes in Vision and Transformation, his commentary on the Noble Eightfold Path. And this is in the second limb on emotion. So he says, we may say that we know something, but we know it only with the conscious mind, with the rational part of ourselves. We know it theoretically, intellectually, abstractly. But we must recollect that humans are not just their conscious mind. They are not all reason, though they might like to think they are. There is another part of us, a much larger part than we care to admit, which is no less important than our reason. This part is made up of instinct, of emotion, of volition, and is more unconscious than conscious. And this wider, deeper, and no less important part of ourselves is not touched at all by our rational or intellectual knowledge, but goes its own way, as if dragging the mental part, still protesting along with it. We have to be able to tap those deeper sources within ourselves and bring them into our spiritual life. As for most of us, the central problem of the spiritual life is to find the emotional equivalent to our intellectual understanding. Yeah. I feel it's so true, isn't it? Sometimes we decide things with our head. We think, I'm really going to do that. And then we don't keep it up. The only way to really keep to our choices, or our, our intentions, is when we really involve our emotions or those deeper drives. It's a bit like the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? So there's only 10% of an iceberg that's actually above the ocean, above the sea, above the water. About 90% is underneath, and it's much bigger than that tip. So I think that's a really good simile, yeah? That 10% at the top, our ratio, our intellectual mind, thinks it can hold control over the rest, but no, it won't, yeah? So we're driven by much more than just the intellect. So that's the first remark on wisdom. Buddhist wisdom integrates all of it. So when we really gain insight, it's integrating all of it. And then the second remark, this is about gradual breakthroughs and sudden breakthroughs into insight on the path to enlightenment. When we hear the stories later about the Buddha's disciples, they often meet the Buddha and instantly they hear him teach, and instantly they gain deep insight, yeah? And it is possible, but so that's the sudden breakthrough. But actually it really, if you look into their lives, it often goes back a long way, even to former lives. Yeah, the Buddhist stories are full of also stories of former lives of people, where they've already practiced in a way. So all this builds up to a sudden hearing the teaching, and suddenly it really rings through. And there's a big breakthrough. We all have, we're often on the path of the gradual steps. We all have little insights all the time, probably. If we really practice, we will have insights all the time. And that builds up. There will be bigger ones along the way. And we'll like deeper understanding of meditation, a deeper understanding of metta, a deeper understanding of impermanence, a deeper understanding of a helpful or an unhelpful habits, of our conditioning. And those smaller insights just build up a momentum and lead over time to big insights, to wisdom. There's this lovely Zen simile about the 20th blow. It's like when we hit a piece of rock. Yeah, we hit it with a hammer, and we don't see anything for ages. And then it says the 20th blow, suddenly it cracks open, right? But all the time, something already is happening inside that rock. You don't see it on the outside. Yeah, I think that's a really good simile of how insights, little insights, build up, how practice builds up. It's not always that visible, and then suddenly we see. So that's number 2. And then number 3 that I want to mention are the veils. I just love this image in the Dharma of the veils. So a veil, when you have a veil over your head, over your eyes, you don't particularly see very well, do you? And developing wisdom or developing insight in our lives is really undoing our ignorance. At the heart of the Tibetan image of the wheel of life, some of you are familiar with that, at the heart of it is ignorance, and that is depicted by a blind person, walking around with a stick in the darkness, poking about, not knowing, that's the image of ignorance. And we're all ignorant, otherwise we'd be enlightened right now. So in a way we could say we are covered by veils. We are covered in dark, in mist, not seeing, because we're ignorant. And sometimes these veils can be very thick indeed. So the Buddhist word for veil is varana, and we have 2 of those in Buddhism. So one is the klesha varana, so that's the veil of unskillful, the self-centered, unskillful drives. They're like the deep poisons, like greed, hatred, and delusion that we hear mentioning a lot in Buddhism. The deeply rooted emotions, the emotions deeply rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. So klesha also means defilements or afflictions. So that's that veil of those disturbed emotions. And the other one is the veil of views. So there's misconceptions about the way things are. So, and they're mainly springing from attachment to a self, really, in the wrong sort of way. Thinking that we exist forever, that we don't. Or thinking that we have a fixed self, which we don't. So those 2 are the veils that we are really thinning and thinning and thinning when we practice and when we reflect deeply. That's what we're doing, And when we practice, and when we experience little moments of insights or bigger insights, those veils get pierced a little, maybe by a thin little hole, maybe by suddenly a big gap, and then with big insight, when they disappear altogether. So when we are really awake, when we have insight like the Buddha, the veils have gone. There you go. That little bit of about wisdom. So let's listen to some stories. So I'm going to take you back more than 2,500 years ago to the time of the Buddha in India, north of India, where the Buddha, after his enlightenment, was walking around, meeting people, teaching. And he had many followers. He was very famous. He also had a lot of people there who didn't like him, didn't like his teaching. He was quite a challenge. It was quite a challenge, his teaching, to many. But for one, he actually challenged the caste system that was very around in India. He really challenged that. And he challenged people's views on lots of things. So not everybody liked him, all right? But lots of people did become his followers. And so, yeah, he also had female followers and female disciples who became, some of them became very well known and very loved and very appreciated teachers. So I'm just going to tell you about a few of those. Luckily, some of these stories are documented, and in the Therigatha, which is one of the texts of the Pali Canon dedicated to those women. So first, I want to mention Mahapajapati. She was actually the Buddha's aunt. She was the sister of his mother, and his mother died very soon after he was born. So she started feeding him. She fostered him basically, and she brought him up. Now she, after the Buddha was enlightened, she really wanted to follow in his footsteps, and she started the first order of nuns. So she's quite a remarkable woman, really. That didn't go easy. I won't tell you that story right now, it's for another time. But even though the Buddha really recognized that women and men could gain the same level of enlightenment, there was no difference there. Not for anybody, any being could gain enlightenment. But actually to allow women to create an order, that took a bit more convincing, because it was very, really for cultural and political reasons probably in that time. Scholars look at it in different ways. There's quite a lot of debate about it still, yeah. Even whether that story was made up later, but there you go. Women were definitely not allowed to often live alone or be independent in those days. Anyway, Mahapajapati with 500 other women created the first order of nuns and stepped in the footsteps of the Buddha. So there you go. Good for her, I think. Yeah. And then that was the short story, the half story. So now a fuller story, which is about Kujuttara. And Kujuttara, or Gujuttara, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce her name. Maybe it's Kujuttara. She was quite an amazing woman, actually. She compiled the Ittivitaka, which is quite a famous Buddhist Pali text nowadays, together with the Dhammapada, the Udana, and the Sutta Nipata. They're very early Buddhist texts. It's got 112 teachings of the Buddha in it that she compiled. So I'm really proud of her, actually, because there's not many. None of the rest of the Pali Canon is brought together by women. So it's quite amazing that she did that. But how that happened, I'm going to tell you now, because she was a servant in the palace of Queen Samavati. Queen Samavati was the wife of a king, of Udena, of Kosambi. And so she was a servant, Kujuttara. And every day the queen would give her 8 coins to go to the market or go to the florist and buy flowers to bring back to the palace. So every day they had fresh flowers in the palace. But Kujuttara spent only half of those 4 coins on flowers, and the rest she spent on herself. Yeah. But then one day she went again to the florist, and the Buddha was there. So the florist had actually invited the Buddha for a meal, and then after that, as the tradition was, the Buddha would give a teaching. Yeah. And the florist said to Kujuttara, "The Buddha's here. Would you like to stay and listen?" So she did. And she actually was so affected by the Buddha, by his teaching, that she attained stream entry on the spot. Now, stream entry is a level of insight from where you just can't fall back. You're entering the stream towards enlightenment. It's like you're in that process towards enlightenment. There's no falling back. There's still further to go, but there's no falling back. So she really gained quite a level of insight on the spot, just hearing the Buddha. She didn't quite understand what was happening to her. She couldn't quite make sense of it. But she went to buy the flowers, and she just realized she just couldn't act unethically. So she very happily spent 8 coins, bought loads of flowers, double the amount, came back with that to the palace. And the queen said, "Oh, that's a lot of flowers. How wonderful. Were they cheaper today? Were they in the sale?" And Kujatara, she just had to confess, that she had been taking money for herself every day. She fell on her knees and just confessed. And the queen, she was actually quite a lovely queen, she just forgave her immediately, actually. And she could also, and then Kujatara was telling the queen about her meeting with the Buddha, because she was so full of it. And the queen just really saw how Kujatara had changed, how just that meeting with the Buddha had actually transformed her. So she was quite intrigued. And she asked Kujatara to go to listen to the Buddha every day. The Buddha was staying in a monastery nearby. He said, just go and listen to the Buddha and come back and share it with me and all the other women here in the palace. And that's what Kujatara did. So she actually had an excellent memory, and she could remember the teachings word by word. So she would come back, and a seat would have been made ready for her, and she would be placed on that, or she would go and sit on that. And then it's quite interesting because she's obviously a servant, and the queen and the other, some quite high caste women, would just sit at her feet and listen to her sharing the teaching of the Buddha, as if she was the Buddha, they really listened with devotion and respect. I find it very moving because, the caste system was so strong there. A queen wouldn't sit at the feet of a servant, but there you go, that happened. Then later, Kujatara just compiled all those teachings into this book, the Therigatha, which is still available now. So that's how that came about. I thought a lovely story. And amazing how she did that. I'm just going to pause for a little bit just to let you take in that story before we move on to the next one. Okay, I've got 2 more stories for you, slightly longer ones. So the next story is about Buddha. It's quite a different story. So Buddha, actually her name later became Buddha Kundalakesa. Buddha with the curly hair. Well, you hear how that came about. So she was called Buddha. She was the daughter of a rich merchant, and her parents kept her on the 7th floor of the house. I don't know how high the house was, but there you go, the 7th floor, there she was kept, because they didn't want her to fall in love with the wrong person. Right? They had somebody lined up to marry her. He was of a good, what you say, I'm thinking Dutch now, from good family. But one day, Buddha looked out of a window and saw this person being led to prison. He was a thief or a robber. But he was very good looking. and she just fell in love immediately. She just fell for him on the spot. And she really wanted to marry him. So she wouldn't come out of her bed, she wouldn't eat until her parents agreed that she could marry this man. So they did. And the parents just hoped that the husband would actually change his life, you know, being in a better family, that he would change his life and become a good man. Then one day, the husband lured her in a way to a cliff top, a very high cliff top, and he asked her to put on all her beautiful jewelry. She had, she was the daughter of a rich merchant, so she had wonderful jewelry. He asked her to put that on and go with him to the cliff top. So they did, but there and then she realized what his intention was, that he asked her to give him her jewelry, and she realized he would probably push her over the cliff top and go away with her jewelry. So he hadn't changed his ways. She was very clever, she realized, and she asked him for a hug, an embrace, and said how much she loved him and cared for him. And so they did, and she pushed him over the cliff top. Ouch. Yeah. There you go. In a way, good for her, but there you go. Yeah, she was free now to go, but she also felt deep remorse for killing somebody, killing her husband. So she started, she started to look around and to wander around, and she's looking actually for meaning in her life, and she joined the Jains. They were a tradition that was very alive at the time in India. And she said she had her head shaved, but her hair grew back really curly, actually. That's her curly hair name, Bada Kundalakesa, meaning Bada with the curly hair. So she got very learned. She learned a lot with the Jains, but actually she got dissatisfied and decided that she wanted to learn more from other teachers. So off she went. She became a wandering ascetic, a wandering practitioner. So she wandered around on her own and went to many teachers, learned a lot. She became incredibly skilled in debate, and she became incredibly skilled. It's quite unusual for women to again do that on their own in that time, wandering around on their own. So and practicing in that way, but she did. I think she was pretty courageous. Whenever she entered the town, she would make a pile of sand, make a sand pile, and on the top she would stick a rose branch tree. A branch of a rose tree. And if somebody wanted to debate with her, they would actually just squash the pile, and then it was clear to her that they wanted to debate, and they would enter in a debate, and she would always beat the other person. She would always win, always. Until one day it was Sariputra, the famous, disciple of the Buddha. Most of us have heard quite a lot about Sariputra. And he came to her pile and asked for a debate. And she would ask the question first. He could answer all her questions. And then when he started asking questions, she could not. So she didn't win. But actually she got really curious who Sariputra was and who his teacher was, and asked him about that. And Sariputra just encouraged her to go and meet the Buddha. And so she did. And when she met the Buddha, again, she was really, really strongly affected. And she practiced with the Buddha, and she she entered the order of nuns and she gained insight quite quickly. But interestingly enough, she didn't stay living with the other nuns. Again, she wandered, she kept wandering around and teaching, sharing the Dharma with many. So she kept being a wandering ascetic, but now teaching the Dharma, sharing the Dharma. So she's quite exceptional for a woman. Again, in those days, it is not very safe to wander alone. So that is Buddha. So let's pause again. And I've got one more story. So the next story is the story of Khema. I'm quite proud actually that my name has got Khema in it when I hear her story. Khema is known for her great wisdom, like the Buddha gave her that name. So Khema, she was the wife of King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara, we hear actually quite a lot about him as well in the Buddhist stories, because he was a really good friend. He was the same age as the Buddha. He was a really good friend of the Buddha. And he is a follower of the Buddha's teachings. So Khema was his wife, and she was beautiful. Actually, King Bimbisara had given the Buddha his bamboo grove. It's interesting how Anthony was mentioning in his Dana appeal tonight that people gave mango groves, isn't it, to the Buddha and his followers to stay in. And here King Bimbisara, well, he didn't give a mango grove, but he gave a bamboo grove to the Buddha and his disciples to stay in there whenever they needed, and he looked after their needs very well. So Khema heard a lot about the Buddha from the king, but she really didn't want to go and see him. So Bimbisara kept encouraging her to go and see the Buddha, but she wouldn't. And she was frightened really that the Buddha would find fault with her beauty, that he would criticize her for being attached to her beauty and criticize her vanity, which she was. She was, attached to her beauty and her vanity, as she loved being so beautiful. And so the king, he was clever. He was trying to find a way to get her to see the Buddha, to get her to meet the Buddha, because he knew it would help her. So one day he just hired a group of singers, a band of singers, to come to the palace, and he asked them to sing songs about the beauty of the bamboo grove where the monastery was, where the Buddha was staying. And they sang songs about the beauty, about that beautiful place of peace, of harmony, natural beauty, exquisite. So Khema, who loved natural beauty, was really, really, she got really attracted and decided to go and visit this place. So dressed in silks, sandalwood, beautiful jewelry, she went to the monastery, to the bamboo grove. And while she was in that area, she just heard the Buddha teaching, the Buddha's voice from the hall where he was preaching. And she just found herself drawn towards that. So she went to the Buddha, and the Buddha knew that she was coming, The Buddha was a very perceptive man, with his enlightened mind. He could sense things. And he just also knew that what she was scared of, he just knew about her thoughts and fears. So what he did with his psychic powers, he created an image on this side next to him of a woman even more beautiful than Khema herself, more beautiful. And she was fanning the Buddha, so the woman standing by his side. So Khema just saw this beautiful woman standing beside the Buddha, fanning him. And she was overwhelmed by this beauty. And she said, oh gosh, she really thought to herself, all those people who say that the Buddha doesn't like beauty, they're all wrong, they've been misrepresented, they've misrepresented him. Never before have I seen such a beautiful woman. And my own beauty is not a fraction of her beauty. So yes, those who say that the Buddha is not keen on beauty must misrepresent him. But then the Buddha, he made this created image gradually change from young and beautiful to middle age, and then to old age, with broken teeth, grey hair, wrinkled skin, until it finally fell to the ground, lifeless. So Khema was watching this, and she just realized the vanity of external beauty and the fleeting nature of life, the truth of impermanence. She understood that her own body, would also grow old and die. She really understood there and then the superficiality of her attachment to beauty in the wrong way. She understood the Buddha's teachings on the spot, and she became an arahant there and then. So an arahant is even a higher level of insight than a stream entrant. Yeah. And after that, with the permission of her husband, the king, she joined the order of nuns. And the Buddha praised Khema as the nun foremost in wisdom. And she taught the Dharma to many. But then it goes on a bit, the story of Khema, because one of another meeting is told, where another king, not her husband, King Pasenadi, who was travelling through the countryside of Kosala, where Khema lived. He was travelling through there, and he was wanting a conversation, really, a dialogue on spiritual matters. So he sent his servant to find someone who he could ask questions of a spiritual nature. And the servant asked around and around and found no wise person, no wise man around the time. But then he was directed to Khema, as he was famous for her wisdom. And also famous for her deep insight, her great learning, and her ability to enter into discussion. So they met, and the king asked her 4 questions. And all these 4 questions are about the existence of an enlightened one after death. So the existence of a Buddha. What happens to a Buddha after death? So here they go. Yeah. So Pasenadi asked, here it's called, actually the word used is Therigatha, and Therigatha means enlightened being. So it's another name for a Buddha. So he asked, does a Therigatha exist after death? And Khema answers, the Buddha has not declared that a Therigatha exists after death. Then he asks, then does the Tathagata not exist after death? And Khema answers, the Buddha has not declared that the Tathagata exists after death. And the third question, then does the Tathagata both exist or does not exist after death? Even that the Buddha has not declared. And then the fourth question, then does the Tathagata neither exist nor not exist after death? That too the Buddha has not declared. So what she was saying is the Buddha did not answer those questions. And the king then wanted to know why the Buddha wouldn't answer these questions. We need to understand here that these questions are all to do with the nature of an enlightened person like the Buddha. And an enlightened being has seen through the nature of self-clinging. Questions like these are based in craving for a selfhood. That's how the Buddha sees them. We want to know these things, but actually they're not really useful questions. The only way to know that kind of answer is from an enlightened perspective, not from our own unenlightened perspective. The only way to know the answer is to reach that level of insight oneself. And that's why the Buddha doesn't answer speculative questions like that. So he's helping people to focus on practice here and now, rather than going into those kind of questions. But then there's a lovely bit where in her discussion with the king, Khema uses a simile to illustrate her point. So I'll read this. So she asked the king whether he had a skilled mathematician or statistician who could calculate for him how many grains of sand are contained in the river Ganges. And the king replied that this was not possible, for the grains of sand in the Ganges were innumerable and incalculable. Khema then asked him whether he knew of anyone who could figure out how many gallons of water are contained in the great ocean. And that too, the king answered, was impossible, for the ocean is deep, immeasurable, hard to fathom. Just so, said Khema, is the Tathagata, the Buddha. Whoever wishes to define a Tathagata, a Buddha, can only do so through the 5 skandhas. Yet those who have reached awakening no longer hold to any of the skandhas as their personal identity. The Tathagata is released from being recognized by form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Those are the 5 skandhas. A Tathagata is deep, immeasurable, hard to fathom, like the great ocean. Therefore, she says, it is not appropriate to say that after death the Tathagata exists or does not exist. None of these designations can define the undefinable. So here in a way she's saying that the Buddha just can't be defined like that. And the king rejoiced in the penetrating and clear explanations of Khema. And then later the king met the Buddha and he asked him the same questions. And the Buddha replied exactly as Khema had done, using the very same words. And the king was amazed and impressed by Khema and reflected on the teachings. So that is the story of Khema. Well, don't know what you make of all that, but those are some of the stories. There's many more, but I had to choose a few. And yeah, that's, as Padmasaki said, often those stories, that when those women disciples, when they, well, the male disciples as well, when they gain insight, that level of deep insight, they often utter sentences or verses or poems describing that, and they often use images like it's like a light goes on, or actually the light of the passion goes out. Yeah. Yeah, the stories, yeah, like that. Or they often actually gain insight doing something very simple. That's also quite nice. Yeah, it's like Patachara is another one of the disciples of the Buddha. She just gains insight when she washes her feet and sees the water just trickling down from the rock, and sees the different levels of some water, trickles down very deep, some water not so deep, and she just at that moment just gains insight into that people live short lives or long lives. Her kids had actually, her young kids had died, and her husband had died too. So she had it's quite a story of misery, really. But just, and she goes mad actually for a bit. But then she just sees that water and just understands. So there you go. Enough of the stories. I can go on and on. I want to give you a little bit of space to, if you want to, any of you, to, comment on anything. Or we can sit quietly for a bit.
Very inspiring.